I remember Tristan always saying to me, I'm doing my best. Can't you see that I'm doing my best? And I got to a space where I looked at him and I said, well, your best is not good enough for me. Your best isn't serving us and isn't serving this relationship. Hi, and welcome back to Seriously Old Dirt. Before we start the episode tonight, Tristan and I both just wanted to say a massive thank you to Mike Ratcliffe and the Villafante team. They gifted us with 6 beautiful bottles of Seriously Old Dirt wine. So cheers and thank you so much.
Yeah, here's to you. Thank you very much. So, on the topic of Seriously Old Dirt, over the last month, thanks to all your support, obviously, we've been receiving a number of emails and questions over social media, and everybody always wants to know the dirt and the goss. But we really just wanted to cover one topic in particular tonight, which is a very tough discussion to have. But thanks, Mike. Hopefully you help me get through this.
So the topic we're looking at is how to handle the relationship with ex. And for me, I was sharing with Tristan, Seriously Old Dirt and Blending and Mending is only a month and a half old, right? 2nd of April was the launch. And I've received so many emails from women across the globe just expressing that this being one of their most fundamental challenges is how to handle the ex. And by no means do Tristan and I have all the advice. There's a lot of circumstances that have come through that we actually can't relate to. But what we did want to share is parts of our story and take you back to the very beginning of our struggles and our challenges and how we managed to identify and put the boundaries in place that we needed to manage the ex relationship, because we struggled. We really did struggle.
Yeah, it wasn't easy in the beginning. We've mentioned, and you've seen, our scenarios are quite different in terms of relationships we have with our exes. But in the beginning, for me, it was tough. But I didn't realize how hard it was for Chantal at the time. And, I didn't sign up for this. Came up numerous
Often.
times. Yeah, so I think we're going to unpack it as best as we can. Hopefully, our experience can help somebody out there. But like we said, compared to some situations out there, we have it relatively easy.
Yeah.
So we know people are going through a lot worse than what we are. But we encourage you to reach out and share your stories with us. So maybe we can share your stories, keep it anonymous. But yeah, let's jump straight into our Seriously Old Dirt.
This name is becoming more and more relevant.
It's going to be an adjective for
So,
us.
I'm going to take you back to the beginning of our relationship. So, Tristan and I decided that we wanted to start seeing each other as you do. But at that stage, we really weren't seeing a lot of each other. So I think if we saw each other 2-3 times a month at that stage, it was a lot. And the premise around it was really, is this going to go somewhere? Let's spend time together. And over that time, we slowly started spending more and more time with each other until we got to the full-blown stage of, I think we're dating.
Yeah.
I think we've crossed the line.
Who asks who? Are you my girlfriend? Are you my boyfriend? We weren't there.
No. So one of the examples that I remember that was hard to manage at the time is Tristan and I would go out on a date and we would maybe go have a lunch somewhere, or we would go have a dinner somewhere. But I remember the lunch scenario specifically and us coming back into Johannesburg because we had had a lunch outside of Joburg, had come back and we were on our way back home and we were going to have some dessert and some wine at the house and just carry on the rest of the afternoon. And I remember Tristan getting a call from his ex-spouse because she's wanting to take their son to the park and he needs his bike. And Tristan dropped me off at home, went back to his house to pick up the bike, to drop off the bike, Oh, I didn't think I would start crying. But went to drop off the bike to then come back to me. And this happened more than once, different scenarios. And I remember saying to him, did we need to drop off the bike today? Could we have managed expectation? Could we have said, I'll get the bike to you in the next 2 to 3 hours? Or I have plans today. Sorry, unable to get the bike to you, but can you potentially take our son to the park tomorrow? But I think at that stage, Tristan was so conflicted in terms of keeping everyone happy and trying to minimize conflict that I became the lesser of the two evils. So often I felt that I was the second choice. And this happened regularly. It really was a situation of if that phone rang, I knew that he was going to leave and that I was going to be left alone because he needed to do what he needed to do. And it was just a really hard phase of life.
Yeah, and at the time I was completely blind to it. I thought I knew what I was doing. I thought I was managing expectations as best as I could. But like Chantal said, I was in a rut. I was caught in old ways and old habits, in a relationship that, was hard to see whilst I was in it. And we've been seeing each other 3 years now.
October is 3 years.
October's 3 years. And this isn't something that lasted a month or 2 months.
No.
This was something that maybe just before I moved in
Yeah.
started getting better. And there were multiple examples of me just dropping things and running off. Accepting things that I shouldn't have, things that I accepted in my marriage, things that I accepted that were part of the reason that caused my separation. So I was in a rut, I was in habit, and it was hard to shake that habit. And everybody looking in couldn't understand why I made the decisions I made and why I never put the boundaries in place. It was hard for me, but yeah, I had to shake off something that I was part of for 10 years, and it's just what I did in my marriage, and it was what was expected of me, and I really struggled to shake it.
Yeah, I remember often saying to Tristan, so we're very different in the sense of I'm just going to sound so terrible, but I don't generally care what people think. I'm going to follow my heart and I'm going to do what really makes me happy. And for Tris, he's so aware of just the people around him and he just wants to keep the peace. But I remember saying to him, you are not in a marriage anymore. This person phoning, asking for A, B, and C is no longer your wife. You don't need to drop everything at a drop of a hat to see to that or attend to that need. You have a person standing in front of you who loves you very, very much. You're saying you love me back. Why am I not the priority? And a massive conversation, and my friend Susan in the UK knows the saying all too well. But I remember saying to Tristan, your words and your actions don't align. And that became a trigger for you. I remember saying to him, we'd have these big blowouts, and I would say to him, what's going on? You say I'm a priority, you say you care about me, but when that bloody phone rings, you're out the door. And I just said to him, your words don't align to your actions, and I can't be with someone who is not going to prioritize what I need and what we need as a couple because you're trying to keep the peace. Where is that boundary? Where does that boundary lie?
Yeah, and it was hard. It was hard setting boundaries. And I remember I've been seeing a psychologist for many, many years. And I would think I would have a win. I would think that the decisions I was making was for us. But when you analyze it and post-mortem, you realize that it wasn't for us. It wasn't for me, and it wasn't for Chantal. It was for the other person. And it wasn't Jordan. And I started needing to put boundaries in place. So there would be small boundaries,
Yeah, that's where it started.
and you get resistance because it's not what she was used to. And it was really hard to put these small boundaries in place. And as you get through one, you think you've cracked the code. Things are quiet for a week or two, maybe a month, and then something else pops up, and then you immediately resort back to what you did, because I would want to protect what I had, and what I had was with Chantal and what the life that we thought we wanted to build together. But in essence, I wasn't doing that relationship any favors at all.
This relationship.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this relationship. In fact, I was pushing Chantal further and further away, because, like she said, I would say I was going to do something, and then 2 weeks later, the same scenario pops up, and I'd forgotten on how I'd reacted, but I reacted in the moment. You know, you work in you go straight into survival mode.
Yeah.
And you don't always make the best decisions when you're in survival mode. You're just trying to keep the peace, and it caused huge problems.
Yeah. I remember Tristan always saying to me, I'm doing my best. Can't you see that I'm doing my best? And I got to a space where I looked at him and I said, well, your best is not good enough for me. Your best isn't serving us and isn't serving this relationship. And until you can draw that line in the sand, I don't know if I want this. And we had a massive fallout last year, where in this kitchen that you see behind us, it was close to a family event, and I remember Tristan getting the telephone call, and there was a heated argument, and I was still in my gown having a cup of coffee, and I wanted to literally crawl over the kitchen counter. I wanted to grab the phone, and I wanted to put the boundaries in place. I wanted to have the hard conversations, because it's also hard being the woman on the outside looking in, and I can see the dynamic that's playing out. I can hear what's being discussed over the phone, and I don't keep quiet. So I'm like, that's not true. And just be like, shh, shh. But I wanted to get involved. I wanted to take control, because I just felt, do something, say something, step up. And yeah, it was such a hard time of life that I remember saying to Tristan last year, I know that I love you and I love your son very, very much. But with you comes this old life. And until you can package what that life was and figure it out and put the boundaries in place, I don't know if I can be part of your future. And that was hard, because you meet someone, you know what you want this relationship to be, you know what it can be, and I know what a wonderful human being he is. But I felt, and I always said this, that telephone call, the person on the other end, there's this kryptonite where you almost fall.
That's a word, huh?
That's the word. But you become.
Episode, oh.
It is another episode, but where you become almost, I don't want to say weak, because that's not the right word, but you would give in for the sake of. And I didn't like being on the receiving end of the sake of. And I made it very clear to him, I'm not an unfair person. And he knows. He's had arguments where I've said, you know what, I actually think your ex-spouse in this situation is right. And we would have those conversations. We would unpack it. But I did say to him, somewhere along the line, you need to realize that that person is no longer in your life. And that person is the mother of your child, is always going to be the mother of your child. I respect that and I appreciate that, but there needs to be a boundary. And I think a massive turning point for me was, and Tristan was saying, we still struggled probably up until he had moved into the house. But when he started putting those boundaries in place and started saying no, and not no just for the sake of, no because it was fair to say no given the circumstances, I felt like I could start trusting him, because I didn't trust him. When that phone rang, I wanted to answer. I wanted to have the conversation. And I think with Tris stepping in and having those hard conversations, being fair in terms of where he was coming from, and putting him, his son, and to an extent us first, made a huge difference. And I always said to him, I felt like I was projecting my anger. Not always, this is I said to you last year. I felt like I was projecting my anger to the wrong person. I was angry with her. I really was so angry with her. And she became such a trigger for me. But I said to him, I was directing my anger at the wrong person. I was angry with him. I was angry with Tristan not saying no, not being boundaried, because I said to him, the boundary starts and stops with you. And if you allow certain things, those things will continue in our home. When you stop and you say no and you manage that boundary, things are going to get better. And that's, I think, slowly what started happening.
Yeah, and I think from your perspective, I was trying to keep her happy. Um,
You were trying to lessen the conflict.
sure, but from an outside view, it's, oh, you're trying to keep her happy. But it wasn't. It was my stress, my anxiety. In 2020, I suffered from, whilst I was going through divorce and starting a business on the side and working in sales and things were hectic at the time, I suffered from a mild stroke, resulted in something called Bell's palsy. So I had half my face was paralyzed. And I think that was the biggest turning point
Yeah.
that I've had. It was the stress, it was the anxiety. Dealing with these high pressure decisions was hard. And it wasn't for my ex. It was for me. Everything I did was for me. Because I needed to keep my stuff together. I needed to control my thoughts and my actions. And unfortunately, at the time, there were consequences to it, and Chantal got the short side of that. But then we started really discussing, because I needed to be open-minded. I needed to be listening to what Chantal was telling me. I needed to be receptive to the lessons and the trainings I was going through counseling, and just the years of growth that I had to now put together and really step up and be a man. And one of the best advice, or bits of advice that I got was, if it's not about your son, don't entertain it. So, and that was hard to get right. So if there was a situation, and my first question was, how does this impact my son? If it didn't, I don't respond. It's not an argument, it's a non-starter. There are patterns that come across, where I'm sure everybody can relate. You can see when an argument is coming. You can see when somebody's going to switch lanes on the highway and cut you up. So the patterns were always there. I just needed to be receptive enough to see the patterns and make the right mindset early on. I couldn't allow myself to get into, call it the lizard brain, right? Which is your fight and flight receptors. Once you're in that part of the brain and not at the top in the frontal cortex, sorry to get
I know, wow, well done you.
Well, no, but if you cannot keep your focus here, there is no ways you will make a logical decision. It is just not possible. And I had to fight my own thoughts and my own habits to preventing myself going to fight or flight. I needed to control my thoughts. And when it wasn't about Jordan, it was easier for me to let go of these things. And if I was letting go of these things,
I started to.
Chantal stopped letting go of these things. There are still triggers that come up once in a while that affect both of us, but we've both learned to adapt, and one stays out of that emotional state and lets the other one go through what they need to go. There's nothing against them, but just let them go through it. You're there to support them. You're there to encourage them to move forward. And slowly but surely, every little boundary that was introduced started to become a solid wall, a solid barrier. And in time, this isn't an overnight recipe, I'm afraid, but in time, you are able to put boundaries in place without being These are my boundaries, 1 to 10.
Yeah.
The habits start to break, and there's habits on both sides, right? There's habits from my ex side of asking and receiving, or asking and getting a response. So just as much as I needed to grow and we needed to grow, she needed to grow, but she needed to grow in her own space.
Yeah.
And as much as I want her to be happy and find a life for herself, I can't control that anymore. That's not my responsibility. And what made things difficult or different for Chantal, to be honest and to be fair, was you didn't have this with your ex. So this entire time we had a moment where things were difficult, but we worked through it, and it wasn't the same. He was doing his own thing, you were doing your own thing. Your sense and your focus was always around Mila at the center. I hope I can say that.
Yeah,
Mila at the center, and you both respected those boundaries, and that's what it was. For me, it was different, and you were getting an insight into my world. You were getting an insight to the life that I was having. You were getting an insight as to the strong face I wore for many, many years that nobody thought. Well, I think nobody thought. Now that I'm on the outside, the actions were clear, the habits were clear, the routines were clear, the signs were there, and I never saw them. So it's been hard. It's been a journey. It's, the one thing around this discussion about trusting and giving control to your partner to make the right decisions. On the one hand, I had to learn to relinquish control, that it wasn't my responsibility anymore. And that was hard because my entire fabric was to not recreate the things of the past with my childhood, my upbringing. And I wanted to be this man that provided for his family and broke the mold so that my son didn't come from a divorced family. I can only hope that he makes the right decisions in his life, and I can only hope that he can potentially break the mold. But divorced families aren't the worst. As long as everybody involved, whether you were living together or not, or married or divorced, as long as you work together in some way or form to ensure that your kids are the center of everything you do, and that every action you take is for them and it benefits them. So yeah, that's a mouthful. Sorry.
The one thing I absolutely need to bring into this conversation, going back to control, is I remember phoning my mom, and we had more than one conversation. And then again, my friend Susan in the UK, and the constant advice that I was getting from the people that I love around me was, Chantal, this isn't in your control. You can't control what happens on that telephone call. You can't control how Tristan reacts. You can't control what's happening in their dynamic. I can't control their co-parenting relationship because, like Tris was saying, it's so different to the relationship that I have with my ex-husband. And that doesn't mean it's right or it's wrong. It's just that's their dynamic and mine looks different. But that was also a massive aha moment for me last year. And I realized that in therapy because I broke last year. I was diagnosed with anxiety, and I needed to put myself first. And I needed to figure out how I was going to hold on to this without losing myself, without losing my independence, but absolutely allowing my partner to be a partner. And it's hard for an A-type personality.
Two A-types.
Independent. I mean, independence is something that's absolutely been drilled into me my whole life. And I'm proud of being an independent woman. But I needed to get to a space where Tristan and I sat and we had many conversations. And I said to him, these are my boundaries. This is what I expect from you. And I was hard with you. I was like, this is how I would have handled this. This is what you should have said. Why didn't you say this? And
If I got $1 for every time you said that.
and it was hard, but I think my advice to women in the situation is stay true to yourself. Stay true to your truth and stay true to your worth. The conversation we had was, I said to him, I didn't have a terrible marriage with my ex-husband, but I know that both him and I weren't fulfilled. And I walked away from that. I said to him, you're driving me insane. You're not putting me first. I will absolutely walk away from you too. And it wasn't a threat. That was for me. Do you remember? Yeah. That was because I knew what I'm worth. I knew what life I want to live, what life I wanted to live. And I wasn't going to compromise on that. I've said to him before, you've met me in the worst part of my life because I've made the big decisions, I've made the big sacrifices, and I've chosen myself and my daughter. And I know what I want and what I don't want. And I made it very clear to him that the cycle that we were in and the pattern we were in was not a life that I wanted. And putting those boundaries in place, managing those expectations with you, and then through all of that heartache, getting to a space of, I can trust you. This is what I need, and this is what I need for us to grow, became our saving grace.
Yeah, and I think it's, just a message to who's ever listening. It's okay to let go. It's okay to walk away. It's okay to not be in control of everything. And find a partner that you can be so completely vulnerable with, that you can soundboard with, that you can retro every discussion, every decision you've made with. And find a partner who will sit there and be open-minded with you, as much as it kills them sometimes, but to put their bias aside and truly listen to you. Because when you get into these heated arguments, you both think you are talking about the greater good of the relationship and the us. But you tend to have a bias towards yourself. And it's important to leave the ego at the door, and sorry for the corporate talk, but leave the ego at the door and put the weapons down, because you're in an environment that's safe and you can discuss and you can be honest, and it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to admit that you were wrong, because through all this, there were times that I had made decisions that I'm pretty certain were the right things to make at the time, right decisions to make at the time. And in many years to come, when we look back at all of this, we'll look back at these times as character building and changing and very difficult circumstances that we came across and conquered together. But you have to be able to talk to your partner and be open about your feelings, about the challenges you're going through, why you made certain decisions, and you need to be open to hearing them back. But you have to be calm in all this. We don't get it right still. There are still times where we do bump heads, and I think in the podcast with Nadine spoke about the 3-day dip. I'm trying to get it down to 3 days with Chantal. But the dip is definitely less than it was. I think the moral of the story is trust each other to get through the stuff that they need to. Give each other time to heal. Because
that's a podcast on its own.
Probably. But give each other the space to heal. If you come into a relationship where there's been years since the divorce and maybe multiple relationships in between, and everybody gets a chance to find out who they are, cool, they've gone through that healing process. We found each other relatively soon after our divorces and our separations. And we need to give each other that space to heal, to find our comfort, to find out who we are, because we made big, bold decisions in terms of ending our marriages. And we need to be true to those ideologies. We need to be true to, I did it for my happiness. And fair play to Chantal, although she's madly in love with me, is to put me in my place and say, look, you are one foot out the door already.
There were many.
That ice is so thin, if you breathe on it, it cracks. But we've gone through the challenges. I think you need to trust each other, that they are doing the things that they believe is best for the us, for the hour, for the home, for the family. But if it's not right, still have the discussion and steer them in the right direction. And don't meet it with hostility, because the chances are that person is making decisions under stress. They are making decisions under old habit, and it takes them time to get through this. I don't want to say I was an abused dog or anything, but if you've ever adopted or rescued a pet from the SPCA or any sort of kennel for any home, it takes that animal a while to get comfortable in their surroundings. So be patient. Don't give up at the first hurdle. I am extremely grateful that Chantal didn't give up on me, because it was very easy. I went through a very, very dark patch during our relationship that I didn't know whether I was coming or going. I would make one decision to keep a fight at bay, and the next thing I look and there's another fight coming. And I went through a very, very dark point in my life, and I'm grateful that you stuck it out with me, and that you and I can sit here now and tell each other tell everybody else these stories and be vulnerable. So yeah, that's a lot. Yeah.
Look, we can go on about this topic for hours and hours and hours, but I think for us, in terms of one of the first episodes for Seriously Old Dirt, it's about boundaries, it's about managing expectations, it's about having the hard conversations, it's about communicating what you need from your partner, and then your partner showing up to meet those needs. That to me is the crux of this, right? Is to gain that trust.
And set expectations, and don't be shy of what your expectations are. Be honest. Because if you don't set expectations, if you don't share what you want from a relationship, and that person lets you down but they never knew, you can't blame them. So be clear. You know, we're going through a place, we've done this before. We've been married, we've been divorced. We want to make sure that this time round it works, and that we can give examples to our kids of what a happy home looks like, and what a happy blended family looks like, and what a relationship can be like with your child, with your kid, with your kids, both parents. Or so set those expectations, be clear, be bold, and don't back down of what you know is right, because eventually we come round.
So what he's saying is the woman is always right.
More so.
Thank you for taking the time just to listen to this podcast, to form part of our story. I think there were some proper moments there for both you and I. And we're going to keep telling the story, and we're going to add on to different parts of our life and share that with you as an extension of ourselves and how we've grown. So thank you. And again, thank you to Seriously Old Dirt.
Thank you. I love
Thank you.
you.